Hey, welcome to Flatwater Free Press Conversation. I am Michael Severe. We're joined this month by Jeff Yost, who is the president and CEO of the Nebraska Community Foundation. Jeff, we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Born and raised in Nebraska.
Born and raised in Red Cloud. It's about 40 miles south of Hastings, home of Willa Cather. So really amazing stuff in my little hometown of Red Clouds. My mom still lives there and some of my siblings. So my kids still think of that as kind of their second hometown, and I think of it as my hometown.
Tell me what's similar about Red Cloud now. What's really different?
Yeah, Red Cloud has totally reinvented itself in the past 20 years, really taken advantage of the opportunity afforded by having a world-class cultural asset like Willa Cather. The economic development strategy is now primarily based in heritage tourism. About 10,000 pilgrims a year come to Red Cloud to see Cather stuff. So it's really, really amazing work. And that's so much of the work we do in the Nebraska Community Foundation is helping communities to discover their unique and special assets and really figure out, okay, how do we create prosperity and quality of life that is adjacent to that? I would say the narrative in Red Cloud today is really incredible. I got out of high school in 1986. When I got out of high school, the implicit message was, you're a bright, articulate kid. Your future's someplace else. We'll see you for the holidays.
Right.
No society can sustain itself if that's its message to its children. So much of our work at the Nebraska Community Foundation is to try to help communities to have a more positive message, a more positive self-fulfilling prophecy about the future of their place and the future that they're talking with their kids about.
You went to school to be an economist, right?
Yep.
And you worked in the governor's office for a while?
I did. I worked in the governor's office for about 5 years in the Ben Nelson administration.
How did that help you when you transitioned to go into the foundation in terms of obviously you saw what lobbyists do, you see how the economy works. How did that help you?
I was given a lot of responsibility in the governor's office for a young man in his 20s, which was really incredible. So I got to do lots and lots of things. I got to lobby, I got to work on special projects, I got to work on an interagency basis, and there were really three things that I came away from associated with that for me personally, I didn't want to be involved in politics because the time frames of politics are too short for me. I'm interested in building things, and you build things over generations. You don't build things over election cycles.
So 2 years, 6 years, 4 years, not working out for it.
It is so for me. The second thing was I didn't like how binary it was. You won or you lost.
Yeah.
Most of the world gets better not because we're competing, but because we're cooperating.
That makes sense.
And we're really trying to help people get better and constantly evolve. So is hard work and competition part of this and part of the American way? Of course. But so much of politics, again, it was very much a win-lose, winner-take-all kind of thing. And I'm a big fan that power is infinite. And in politics, power is really a zero-sum game.
I have it or you have it.
Yep. So in the Nebraska Community Foundation, we're in the business of constantly helping people create new power in the universe. If I share something with you, if I teach you something, if I somehow empower you, I didn't become less powerful, but you became more powerful. We just created new power in the universe.
Then I can pass the power you gave me on to someone else.
Yeah.
And we all
powerful. And the third part that I learned was that government wasn't built to do all things to increase public good. We're going to have to do a lot more things than just government to create public good. And many, many of them are long-term things. But so many times the thinking in government is pretty short-term stuff.
Because of the election cycle.
And one of the things that I did a lot of time on is what were called unfunded mandates. So Congress would pass something and tell the states they must do it and not pay for it. State legislatures would tell counties and municipalities and school districts to do something and not pay for it. Well, one of the things that did was that continued to erode the discretion that those locally elected officials were elected to do. So my dad was a school board member in the 60s and 70s, and then he served on an educational service unit board for many, many years after that. When my dad first got on the school board, right or wrong, it was 5 men and a male superintendent, but the 6 of them had to figure out how to educate those kids. which was one heck of a leadership development opportunity because you had to think about your system holistically.
Mm-hmm.
If we now look at how government finance works and being a locally elected official, you don't have a whole lot of discretion as it relates to your budget. So we end up having people get elected as single issue candidates.
Mm-hmm.
We have people get elected on very, very sort of narrow platforms. What we're interested in is community building, and community building is a holistic activity. So as we continue to talk here, we can talk about how some of the things we're doing in the Nebraska Community Foundation are intended to help more and more community leaders have greater and greater discretion and therefore more influence over the future of their place.
Community Foundation began in 94?
In 1994 was when the first affiliated funds came on board, yep.
Right. Same mission essentially when it started as it is now?
The mission has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, the theory of change has always been in place, and that theory of change is Nebraska's an amazing place, but we haven't always talked about it or acted like it's an amazing place. So how on earth do we lift up the goodness, celebrate it, and then use that as a building block? So many times community economic development work gets framed in deficits, and many times you qualify for government money because you don't have something.
Mm-hmm.
And in lots of circumstances, that makes perfect sense. But when you're trying to develop something, that doesn't make as much sense. So much of what we do in the Nebraska Community Foundation, and this has always been the case, is our frame is what's called asset-based community development. And it's exactly what we did in Red Cloud, is we helped Red Cloud deeply discover the importance of having a world-class cultural asset like Willa Cather.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else has that. That's competitive advantage. Right. And that's the work we do in the Nebraska Community Foundation, is to help people discover their assets in their place and then use those to mobilize the future and get better and create better lives.
$450 million invested in Nebraska hometowns since 94.
Yeah.
How do you determine what hometown it's going to, what person it's going to, what park it's going to, what hospital?
So the Nebraska Community Foundation itself is not a grant maker. All of our grant making happens through our 250 plus affiliated
Mm-hmm.
funds. So again, this lesson we learned about discretion, we're trying to apply that lesson in the Nebraska Community Foundation frame. So a local affiliated fund, so Red Cloud has a local affiliated fund. That affiliated fund may have many, many different accounts within it for different purposes. And it's part of how we track donor intent. Mm-hmm. So when a donor makes a gift to a particular purpose, well, you want to make sure it gets spent for that, right?
Sure.
And if it's an endowment gift, you want to make sure the payout gets spent for that. So that $450 million reinvested in places, that's all local work that's happened in communities to improve, health and wellness, to improve K-12 education, to work on early childhood development, to help people age in place, economic development, leadership and development, youth engagement, job training, recycling, the environment and natural resources, mentoring. I mean, just any and all of these things you can think about within the realm of public good. We've worked on it over time and helped raise money for it and helped help these communities to get better.
In terms of that 275 or so communities, if you give them the funds, how do you train them to know what to do with it? How do you make sure that those investments are going to be used the way they need to be?
Yep. We don't give them the funds. Almost all of that money is raised locally. Mm-hmm. So much of the work of the Nebraska Community Foundation is motivating, empowering, teaching, training, mentoring local leaders to go and talk to their friends and neighbors. We're big fans that change happens along the lines of relationships. And that's what we are. We're in the change-making business. We're helping people try to make things better, not by burning down what's there, but by really helping to lift up all the goodness and say, okay, with all this goodness, how do we get better? How do we use the science we know today that we didn't know 50 years ago to keep getting better with education and healthcare and wellness and economic development?
So how do they learn to be able to raise that money? Is that something that you guys help them with?
Yep. That's much of the work that we do at the Nebraska Community Foundation, our community building practices with. So we're very, very interested in working with community leaders that want to learn how to do this. But again, the most important part of fundraising is typically trust. The world is full of awesome ideas, right? So why would I give my money to this idea or that idea? Well, what we're helping community leaders to do is to begin to become comfortable and confident in going and having conversations with their friends and neighbors and inviting them into community building with them. In using philanthropy as a community economic development strategy, we can't make anybody do anything. All we can do is motivate and inspire. So that's what we do, is we motivate and inspire. And a big part of the motivation is helping people to learn the skills and to build the teams to be successful. Many times we'll help them create a catalyst to do that. So a big part of this issue associated with helping community leaders to have more discretion as well is really one of the highest forms of mission fulfillment at the Nebraska Community Foundation is to helping a small community to build what's called an unrestricted endowment for that place. So it's an endowment. It's a perpetual pot of money where you're just using some of the payout every year from the investment earnings, but the corpus remains intact over time. The fascinating part about it is there isn't a purpose statement. The purpose is to benefit that place. And boy, that could change 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, right?
Sure.
So it's a big part of what we use as a leadership development tool is to help people understand their place and then discern, okay, how would I use the payout from my unrestricted endowment to create a margin of excellence in my place? How do we use it to build it out so it is a place where young people want to live and work and raise their families, and a place where the narrative is very positive and uplifting, not just like, well, in Nebraska, we've seen lots of times where the narrative hasn't been that positive. But today, when we can live and work from anywhere, the question really isn't one of jobs.
Right.
The question is why do I want to live and work and raise my family in this place? The question has really become a community question. So we feel like our work is really, really relevant and germane for today's environment.
Well, how do you do that? You mentioned when you grew up in Red Cloud, they had anticipated you going to college and not coming back. How do you encourage young people to finish college or whatever and stay in that town and continue to grow?
So migration is a really, really complicated thing, right? So there's lots and lots of variables, but some of the variables that we try to help people work on. First of all, what do you want to do? What is of interest to you? And many times what young people say they're interested in, those employment opportunities actually exist in that place, but they don't know they exist in that place.
Okay.
So part of the time we're just helping to fill in information gaps. Part of the time we're actually helping adults to not ask questions that may be perceived as young people, as something that's not really helpful.
Give me an example.
Well, we have all sorts of stories of young people moving back to their hometown and a well-intentioned adult that they grew up with, encountering them on Main Street and saying, "Why are you back here? Couldn't make it in the big city?"
Right.
It's avoiding things like that. And I don't think anybody's doing it because they want to be malicious. They're doing it because that's the culture that we've built over time, that the expectation was if you're successful, you're someplace else. And what we know about a 21st century economy is that's not true. We have lots and lots of colleagues. We have lots and lots of stories of young people, middle-aged people, people with young families, et cetera, living and working wherever they want to live and work because that's where they've chosen to be. And that's what we're trying to help our hometowns in Nebraska do, is we're trying to help them magnetize themselves so people want to be a part of that community. And that's a whole bunch of things, right? I mean, part of that's money. Part of that's having a plan. Part of that's having a culture where people are not only friendly and welcoming, but there really is a sense of belonging. Part of that's employment opportunities. I mean, there's a whole combination of things here. And we're seeing tremendous success in lots and lots of communities where they're They're fitting all the different pieces together and using it with their community assets. And they're having great success in young people that grew up there moving back in early adulthood, and other people that didn't grow up there moving in and becoming a part of the community as newcomers.
And it can be as simple. I know in Hope County, they talk about building a movie theater, having a grocery store, having a cool place to go out and get a Moscow Mule. Just having those sort of things is a part of it.
Entertainment is certainly a part of it. We actually see entertainment being less and less important, especially to young people, than what it was, say, 10 years ago.
Really?
And I think a lot of that is because, I mean, you think about the entertainment options we have at home today in comparison to the entertainment options we had at home 10 years ago.
Sure.
So entertainment's still incredibly important, and boy, these community spaces are extraordinarily important. But we see young people in particular talking about how incredibly important it is to have high quality schools. Yeah. How incredibly important it is to live in a safe place where you know your neighbors. How incredibly important it is to be raising your kids near your parents. So this whole idea of extended family is something that we've really come back around to.
Yeah.
So those are three of the big reasons that we get from young people as to why they want to be a part of a place. But there's all sorts of things. There's, entertainment venues, civic venues, employment venues, just all the sorts of things that people want. And they, good schools, quality healthcare, recreational opportunities, etc.
Many of these kids, when they leave to go to college, sometimes that might be the first diversity they see when they go to college.
Yeah.
In order to move back, maybe they're looking to have some diversity still in their lives. Is there anything that can be done in those small towns, or is that just something that's very difficult to do?
There's a very substantial number of places in Nebraska that have had pretty sizable amounts of in-migration from new Americans over the years. Mm-hmm. Many of those folks are Hispanic, Latino, but we've seen a lot of other places where there are people from both East Africa and the Ivory Coast.
Oh, yeah.
Throughout Central and South America, a fair amount of people from Central Asia, and a fair amount of people from East Asia, depending upon the communities. There's a number of places we work today where kindergarten classes are a third to half non-Caucasian students.
Really?
So as we think about demographics in our places, the demographics, especially in schools, are changing pretty dramatically. And so there is more diversity in our places than we're used to. I think the other thing that we're really interested in from a diversity standpoint is diversity is going to manifest itself in all sorts of ways, right? Mm-hmm. There's ways of thinking. There's where you grew up. It's your faith community, certainly your politics, certainly your employment and your bent on that. One of the big community building practices we really try to help people work on is not only being nice and friendly, but really trying to good at being welcoming and belonging. So a big part of our community building practice is people belong when they have their gifts and talents received and appreciated. So I don't belong in a community if somebody just tells me I belong. I actually have to feel it myself.
Right.
So a big part of our community building practice is to help people understand that what is the psychology that actually goes into belonging. And then no matter what your skin color is, no matter sort of where you're coming from, if you have commonalities and common interests and common purpose, we can absolutely all live together and do lots and lots of really progressive, wonderful things in our place, even if we don't agree on everything.
You mentioned earlier, you can almost work anywhere in the world now with your computer and Zoom. And that's one of the things that we really learned from COVID. At the same time, a lot of shortages and other things from COVID have been tough. Has it been difficult for those communities fundraising, being able to raise dollars in these last 3 years?
It has not. Nebraska has extraordinary abundance. So one of the things we've studied in the Nebraska Community Foundation is something called the intergenerational transfer of wealth. Mm-hmm. And it's when, since World War II in particular, the United States has become an extraordinarily wealthy place. And Nebraska is a big part of that as well. So one of the things I talk about it within the context of this is my parents both grew up in or near Red Cloud. I'm the sixth of six children. Only two of my siblings continue to live in Red Cloud and Webster County. The other four of us are someplace else.
It's actually pretty good, right?
Not bad.
You think a third?
Yeah. But what happens to whatever my parents made and accumulated during their lifetimes when they pass away?
Mm-hmm.
Usually it just gets divided by the number of children you have. Well, if 2/3 of those children no longer live there,
Right.
2/3 of the wealth leaves. So really the leading indicator was the loss of human resource because people migrated. The lagging economic indicator is the loss of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
So many bankers will talk about, kids show up to the funeral, they go to the funeral, they go to the supper, they come by the bank, take the assets out of the bank, and the last thing they see is the tail lights going out of town. So much of what we're trying to help people in the Nebraska Community Foundation network understand and then mobilize is this massive transfer of wealth. We think in the next 10 years in Nebraska, $100 billion will be transferring from one generation to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And we think in the next 50 years, it's close to $1 trillion. In many, many counties we work in, that transfer of wealth is at least $1 billion. So one of the things we've embarked on in the Nebraska Community Foundation is to ask people to think about their hometown and to think about, okay, what if I just gave a small portion of this back to the place that, in my case, there were 2 parents and 6 kids. It totally took a village to raise us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do we do to support that village into the future? So we have a campaign called 5 to Thrive, which is asking every generous Nebraskan to consider giving back 5% of their accumulated wealth to the place and the causes and the people that have helped them to have a great life. We think about 5% of $100 billion in Nebraska, that's $5 billion. You can create a lot of margin of excellence with that.
If one of those families, maybe say they don't have children, and they want to do an endowment in that community, how do they go about that? Do they come through you guys? They go through the community foundation in that community? How do they do that?
So all of these community foundations that are in the NCF network are all part of the Nebraska Community Foundation. So it's all one big entity with lots of sort of independent operating parts. Typically, they'll talk to a local fund advisory committee member about their intention.
Mm-hmm.
They will also talk to their financial planner or their attorney. So it might be the person that's helping them with retirement investing. It might be a real estate person. It might be an insurance person. It might be their accountant, but whoever their financial professional is. And part of what we're trying to do in the Nebraska Community Foundation Network is encourage more and more of the community leaders we work with. And there's about 1,500 community volunteers that serve as advisors to these affiliated funds, the Nebraska Community Foundation Network. So it's a very sizable group of people. Mm-hmm. We encourage these folks to really initiate conversations about what do you want? Mm-hmm. And then more importantly, what do you want your legacy to be? Because we're not all going to live forever.
Yeah.
And we know this transfer of wealth is massive. So part of it is helping people to understand that, how is your family? So one of the conversations might be, well, tell me what's going on with your kids. And somebody tells you all about their 3 kids and they're like, wow, you have 3 extraordinarily successful children. And it very well may be that those children don't have an expectation that they're going to get a big inheritance from their parents because they're doing just fine for themselves.
Right.
But the parents' expectation has always been, I need to save so I can give whatever I have to my kids. Mm-hmm. So part of it is just getting the conversation started within that family.
Right.
Do we want to give something back to this place that helped us become who we are? And might that be to the school system or the healthcare system or we're seeing more and more people say, I really want to give it to that unrestricted endowment because I don't know what the future looks like. Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what this is. It's a fund for the future because we always know there's going to be capital requirements to do whatever we need to do next. And I'm certainly not smart enough to know what the world looks like in 30 years. I have some guesses. Yeah. It'll look very different than it does today.
If you can't figure out a way in some of those communities for that wealth to be redistributed or kept there, are we in danger of losing some of our small towns? Like literally the town name is still there, but there aren't people living there?
Certainly the economy is going to keep evolving. Nebraska today has 532 incorporated places.
Mm-hmm.
In 1930, there were about 850. Once upon a time, we had about 850 school districts. Today, we have 244.
Right.
So are things going to keep evolving? Yes, they're going to keep evolving. The community question becomes, and we work with lots and lots of places that are between 100 people and 1,000 people. And about 70% of those 532 places are less than 500 people. So we work in lots and lots of small towns where those places have a very, very bright future because there is a sense of community. There is a sense of their purpose. There is, they have what any enterprise needs. They have a soul.
Yeah.
So the communities that haven't really worked through that, they're just kind of a bedroom community, or they're just kind of a stopover place, or they don't really have a cohesive vision of who they want to be in the future. Those places are in danger. But many, many of the places we work in that are 300, 400, 500 people have extraordinarily bright futures because technology is actually allowing us to relocalize lots of things. And that's one of the things we've helped a lot of our affiliated funds do. So we have lots of affiliated funds that have helped to relocalize significant elements of their school lunch program with the whole idea that, oh, that's awesome. It would be more healthy. It helps connect those kids to where their food came from, which has all sorts of benefits for, say, STEM education, how to use that within all of your curriculum. And then it really helps to change the narrative of, oh, this isn't a poor little backwater place. This is an awesome place. Look at this incredible meal we have in front of us.
Right.
We really do live in the breadbasket of the world. We don't want to run away from that. We want to embrace that in lots of different ways.
I've met chefs that have moved to Nebraska because of that reason.
Right.
Like literally, I know a guy just opened a restaurant in Fremont. And one of the reasons why he decided to do it was he found a good location, obviously, good building. But he also thought, within 50 miles of me, I'm going to get fresh hogs. I'm going to get the chickens. Everything I want that I have shipped into New York City, I can get it there. Which I thought was a pretty remarkable choice.
And it speaks to the whole idea of what are the assets we have. We have land, we have water, we have amazing people. We can do all sorts of incredible things that we tried to get away from in the 20th century. I think we want to run toward those things in the 21st century because the 21st century is a completely different economy. It's a completely different set of, values and interests.
Yeah. Talk about the homegrown intern program. Sure. You sent me a great piece on that. It was very interesting. Getting these young people to go back. One guy even started his own business there. Kind of tell me how that works.
Sure. So the whole idea of hometown interns was, it always occurred to me that having an internship was kind of hard because you have to meet a whole bunch of new people and you have to learn a whole bunch of new skills and you're 19 years old. So interesting, right? It's an interesting learning opportunity, but I was like, well, what if you actually help the degree of difficulty of that be decreased to some extent? So the original idea was, what if somebody who grew up in that community came back and did an internship in that community during college? So they already have all these relationships in place. We already talked about change happens along the lines of relationships and how important those relationships are. But they're bringing all the benefits of a year or two of new perspective from college back to this thing that they know really well. And I think you can see it with new perspective. You can see it with new eyes, with the hope being that they can then use that with people that they already know and trust to be able to ask really, really authentic questions about what if. What if we thought about doing this? What if we brought technology to bear on this particular thing? What if we did this in the school system? What if we did this for child care and early childhood development? What if we did this with historic preservation? But all of the enthusiasm of somebody that's 19, 20, 21 years old. So very smart, very articulate, but still very, very young in their professional or adult journey, asking lots and lots of what if questions. And then we use our asset-based community development practice to help these interns do what's called asset mapping. in their particular place. So in some of the places we've done this, who are all the people in this community that are artisans?
Mm-hmm.
So they might be crafters, they might be quilters, they might be wood makers, they might be painters, right? And what are all the things that then could be brought together through that? So there's now a festival in Ord specifically connected to the accordion because of this whole arts asset mapping work that they did to really begin to uncover these hidden assets. Right. And one of the things we always talk about within asset-based community development is we're always interested in a process of discovery, and no one person knows everything. So how do you just continually be in dialogue with lots and lots of people and ask them questions, not about what's wrong, what's right, what's awesome, what are you really proud of, what are the things we should know about here and really appreciate. And that again, a big part of that is young people having the opportunity to then help elders in their place reshape the narrative. You know, investment flows to certainty. One of the reasons that people have been disinvesting in rural Nebraska for a long time is because we haven't had a very good narrative, and that narrative has then manifested itself as, oh, that's pretty uncertain. Mm-hmm. So your question about are these towns going to be here or not?
Right.
What we're trying to help people do is, well, there are choices. You know, there isn't just some destiny here. You can impact your future.
Yeah. And
a big part of that is people believing and then manifesting that hope into a plan for how do we make sure that this community continues to be stable, relevant, and then prosperous going into the future. And usually that's because we all band together and get things done and then keep doing that.
A couple more questions. I learned through COVID that I didn't remember as much geometry as I thought I did when I had my 10th grader going through it. But I did realize once I learned the formula, it made it a lot easier. You have the formula of the 3 I's to build community. Yep. If somebody's in a community and they're like, what should I do? That formula helps them kind of develop ideas and get through that tough part of the start of it?
Sometimes. It really depends upon the person, their frame of reference, and then kind of the culture they're used to working in. So one of the things we really believe deeply in the Nebraska Community Foundation network is the benefits of distributed leadership. So we never want to work in a community where somebody has invited us in and it's really just that one person.
Oh, right.
That's not enough. That's
it's a community.
It has to be community practice, right? Mm-hmm. We're big fans of starting where people are. And then usually it's just helping them to begin to elicit what's good, what's right, what do you want to preserve, what do you want to build upon, and who are the other people that should be around the table to help us discern that.
Yeah.
And then usually the second thing is let's get something done. If we just talk and talk and talk, lots of people that are activators just walk away. So we're big fans on, okay, within the first year of having an affiliated fund, let's get something done. Mm-hmm. So we've helped lots and lots of communities with an inclusive playground. We've helped lots and lots of communities do refurbishments to their civic hall. We've helped lots and lots of folks maybe work on elements of a trail system. You know, something that's very tangible and usually not incredibly capital intensive, but something that they can say, yes, we got that done. Because then I'm a big believer that success begets success. And then we start working on the next piece. Well, interestingly enough, we have a number of people now that are approaching us and saying, we want an unrestricted endowment. Okay? So one of the things we're beginning to help many of those folks do is some of the initial money we raise, let's go ahead and grant it out so we can show some of the difference we can make. Mm-hmm. So we then have a better case statement as we approach other donors to be able to help them understand the value of this, because it really is, I love raising money for an unrestricted endowment because it's a conversation about the future.
Sure.
And what more important conversation can any family, can any business, can any community be having than one of the future? Mm-hmm. And this is a way of actually people manifesting that energy and people stating their belief, not just in words, but in deeds.
We were talking about younger people moving back to where they grew up, but like my father-in-law moved back to St. Paul, Nebraska.
Nice. St. Paul's a lovely little place.
It is a great little town, but it's also built around them. They have Grover Cleveland, Washington days, and they have the baseball museum. They have stuff built in there. If a community doesn't have that, what's the easiest way to get started?
Every community has it.
They have something.
Plainview has a clown museum.
Really?
There's just, a gazillion little things. Cawker City, Kansas has the biggest ball of twine.
Yes, right. Yeah, we stopped it, yeah.
Just pick your thing. Mm-hmm. Every little town has it.
Yeah.
And every little town is full of amazing people. So sometimes it may not be a tangible thing. Sometimes it may be the culture. Mm. Sometimes it may be the relationships that already exist there. Sometimes there may be just, certain legacies that they want to perpetuate. Okay. Those are all good things. They're all really amazing assets to be able to build this off of. And then one of the things that starts happening is goodness does beget goodness. So people begin to see the modeling behavior. I want to be a part of that. Right. Quick story for you. So we've done a lot of work in Burwell, and the fund there is called the Calamus Fund because it's for Garfield and Loop County, because it's the Calamus River and the Calamus Reservoir. In the history of that fund over the past 26 or 27 years, they now have almost 6,000 people that have made gifts to that fund, which is dramatically more people than live in those two counties.
Wow.
They've created a culture of, we're going to constantly reinvest in the future of this place. So metrics like that are incredibly important to us because much of what we're trying to do in the Nebraska Community Foundation, we're trying to help people adopt a better set of habits. As Nebraskans, we're habitual. It's not a problem. It's awesome.
Right.
And we're trying to help lots and lots of people create a better set of habits, not only in their charitable giving, but especially in the way they talk to their neighbors, they talk to their friends, and especially in how they talk to their kids.
Not pushing you out of the job. You're older than I am, but you think
now. Be nice.
Well, for you said 86, I'm 87 grad. You look at the future of the foundation and kind of your legacy in it. Yeah. What do you see? What do you see in that crystal ball?
Oh, just all sorts of goodness, all sorts of. I continue to think of the Nebraska Community Foundation as an adolescent.
Really? Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah. If you're talking generations.
I've been here for 25 years. I was the first full-time employee at that time. We're just getting started. Mm. This is really just beginning to get its feet under it. Helping people to think about things differently, think about things in this asset-based, opportunistic frame that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. You don't turn that ship right away, right? That takes a long time to turn that ship. What we are beginning to see from these hometown interns, from lots of our youth survey work, et cetera, is young person's attitudes about their future of their hometown are dramatically more optimistic than adults.
Right.
So again, how do you lift that up and then again help the adults to really think about this? So as I think about my work, I've found my life's work here and I'm delighted doing it, and I look forward to the opportunity to keep doing more and more of it. We have an extraordinary team, an extraordinary network that's doing all sorts of amazing leadership in all sorts of different ways. So part of the time my job is to get out of the way. Part of the time my job is just to be really, really supportive. And then I am incredibly optimistic about the future of this mission going decades into the future. It scared some of my colleagues initially when I would say this, when I first started doing this work. And what I would say is I'm interested in working myself out of a job. And I continue, after all these years, I continued to be very, very interested in doing that, because one of the big things we do here is we don't do things for people or to people. We only do things with people, because communities can only be built by the people that live and work in them.
Yeah.
So we may have particular expertise, but we're not residents.
Yeah.
You know, it's your town, it's your choices. So as we think through how we can be a really, really effective value-added partner, that continues to change over time. And in some places, what they needed help with 10 years ago, they don't need that help anymore. They need us to help them think about a whole series of new pieces. So, so one of the things that's always very energizing to me is I have the opportunity every day here to think about what's next.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing here is we're thinking about what's next, not just for the Nebraska Community Foundation, but for Nebraska hometowns.
Jeff, we appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Michael, thank you very much. Appreciate it.